if you want diverse output, you need diverse input.
Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast presented by Hippo Direct. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, podcasting due to Hippo Direct, and you can reach me at max@hippodirect.com for help using your podcast as a marketing tool. This is episode number 105, and today's guest is Melanie Deziel. She is the founder and chief content officer of StoryFuel and the author of the hit book, The Content Fuel Framework. She is all about helping you brainstorm and generate unlimited story ideas that you can turn into endless content. And she also plays a musical instrument that you will never guess. Let's tap into the mind of Deziel. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Melanie Deziel, the brains behind StoryFuel and the brainstorming queen herself. Melanie, how you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, thank you for joining. So we're going to get into a lot about the brainstorming world and the content world and the brainstorming content world and the content brainstorming world. But before we get into that, I want to touch on your background. And I think the most natural place to start is a listicle that you created about toilets.
Yeah, so I started out in the content marketing world at HuffPost, which, as you know, it's got a bit of a reputation for, at least at that point, a lot of fun listicles. And yeah, I was working with Charmin toilet paper, and my assignment, what we came up with was, I think it was 19 things to do on the toilet to help pass the time. And it was not the peak of my journalistic career, I would say, but it was definitely a lot of fun.
I think that's super creative. Well, 19 is my favorite number, so I think it's a magical number there, so it had to be a great article. What was the most interesting thing on that list of things to do on the toilet? Because I've honestly never thought about that before.
I think one of the suggestions was reorganize your email folder, clear out the emails you're never going to answer and archive emails and check your spam folder. I'm not really sure why we were trying to promote being on your phone or being productive on the toilet. I'm not sure why. I can't remember the brief anymore, why that was part of our goal, but we were just trying to get people to be more productive, I guess.
Well, I think it is the number one top place for multitasking, because you hear so much about, you shouldn't really multitask, but I think in that scenario, it's, in a way you're multitasking. But anyway, so that's the toilet portion. That was an example of branded content that you did, and you really made a name for yourself, especially earlier in your career with these amazing and, as you can tell, breakthrough and creative branded content pieces. How did you get into this sort of branded content type of journalism in the first place?
Well, I always tell people it was totally by accident. I wish I could tell you I had some magical foresight about, content marketing rising in the trends and being a place where I wanted to plant my flag. But truthfully, I was looking for a job, hopefully in journalism, since that's what I studied. And it was just a very smart recruiter that I was working with who said, this is not exactly what you're looking for, but these kinds of jobs are going to allow you to use the exact same skill set and hopefully get a job that pays just a little bit more, since it's on the marketing side. And at the time, you're looking for a job, you take what you can get. I always thought I would take this little detour into the branded content world and make my way back to a newsroom, but I fell in love with it unexpectedly. And so I've really enjoyed getting to be someone with sort of an editorial background in these marketing conversations, getting to bring those best practices in and hopefully try to mix things up a little bit so we have some fun, interesting, and compelling brand content.
Well, it has to help with getting content out there and breaking through in that realm. What do you like so much about this branded content space that you initially were resistant to dive into?
Well, I think in the early days of brand content, and brands have been using content for hundreds of years, so I don't mean that it's a new concept, but in the early days of brand content being what it is, this massive trend and movement that it is right now, there was some concern about whether it was sort of misleading, whether consumers might feel duped if they found out, oh, this article that I'm reading, it's affiliated with a brand. So there were a lot of ethical concerns. And I think the fact that I had studied journalism, ethical concerns and perceptions of being biased are things that we're taught to steer very clear from. So I think that made me a little bit nervous, and it certainly made some of my former colleagues in the journalism space nervous. But I think what I realized is this was happening either way. Content was becoming more important in this digital world, and people were going to be creating it. So my thought process was, if someone's got to be doing it, why shouldn't it be someone who has training or background as a journalist, who can bring some of those best practices, who can bring an awareness of those ethical concerns, who can bring that experience in interviewing and quoting sources and really try to take it to the next level. So I think I thought, in a way, if somebody's got to do this, why not me? Hopefully I can help make it something that, is really, it's going to be worth reading or viewing or listening to. So I think there was that element of maybe I can make stuff that people actually like. But I think there was also an element of wanting to teach and share what it is that I learned. So I found very quickly that in all these roles where I was working on brand content and strategy, I was doing a lot of educating my colleagues. So whether those were folks on the brand content team with me, maybe in the broader communications, PR, marketing teams, or a lot of times I was working with our sales teams, who were having to sell content as a product, or, sell with the assistance of content. And so, being able to help those folks understand the power of storytelling, the language around telling stories, around content creation, was really satisfying for me. I really liked that I was getting to share what I know in a way that helped my team, my colleagues, my organization. And so I think those two elements, this idea that I could actually create something good in a space where people thought it might just be not so good, and that I could hopefully kind of like convert some other folks and get them on board to feeling like it could be something good as well.
And I like how you said that the content is going to be there anyway. So whether it's a person or a brand behind it, it's still going to be content. It's still going to be seen by people. It might change a little bit how it's created or how people perceive it, but there's such a growing world for that stuff.
Yeah.
When you look at your stops along the way, I mean, in your background on the journalism side, you have your stop at Huffington Post or HuffPost. You have New York Times. You have some of the biggest publishers out there. What's the biggest thing you took away in terms of storytelling from being a part of these massive publishers?
So when I was at the New York Times, I was a part of the advertising and marketing team. So I worked for T Brand Studio. I was their first editor of branded content there. And I think that's probably where I really started to think most critically about trust and quality of content. Not to say that that wasn't a concern at HuffPost, but as we just shared in that example, I was able to do things like make toilet listicles. So, as
Wait,
we
what?
used, as we used, as we used to joke at HuffPost, it's hard to have a lot of, like journalistic integrity to like fight on behalf of content quality when we have an entire channel of the website at that point was dedicated to photos of celebrities where they were partially revealed, like we weren't
Yeah. I
exactly
mean, who can't
known,
relate?
right? But like we can't exactly fight for quality sourcing, and like we weren't meant to be a hard news organization. But obviously the New York Times is very different. There is an expectation of a certain amount of quality, of trust with the audience, of things being truthful and fact checked and well organized and well sourced. So it was a very different type of storytelling. And I think having to make that adjustment, which was great for me, I wanted to get closer to those journalism roots, but it really helped me think critically about what is it that makes journalistic content? Like, what is the reason that New York Times content is different from HuffPost content? Not just in its branding or its perception, but like, what are the qualities of that content that make it so? And so that's where I really started to think about things like, including outside sources in our brand content, not just our own sources. The New York Times would never publish a piece that was only quoting other reporters, right? You'd find outside sources to give it credibility. So trying to apply that same principle to our content. So it was really that transition for me from the HuffPost environment to the New York Times environment that really cemented for me the importance of trying to bring even more of those best practices from the journalism world into all the brand content that I created, wherever possible, to try to make it live up to those same standards.
So let's get to StoryFuel, your company,
Yeah.
where you are the founder. Of course, your company, you're the founder and chief content officer. Shout out Ann Hanley. And as part of this, you've really found your focus on the brainstorming side and the content production side. So I think so many people, so many content marketers, so many brands out there know that everyone needs to put out great content right now. But how do you decide what to say and put out there? So on your company side, what was the aha or light bulb moment when it clicked that this is a specialty that you're really, really good at and that you could actually build a business and help out a bunch of other businesses from?
Yeah. Well, I think if I'm being totally honest, my business has evolved over the last 5 years, in line with content trends in general and my own direction. So when I decided I needed to go out on my own was I had the realization after I left the New York Times, I went to Time Incorporated, which at the time was, overseeing 35 different magazines in the US. And, you know,
You're going to set a record for the number of times using the word time, by the way.
I know, right? It's a lot of times in one
It
sentence.
was a crazy
Um,
time.
but at that time, what I realized was that I found myself after about 10 to 12 months in the same position that I had found myself when I was at the New York Times and when I was at Huffington Post, which was if I am brought in to help build these content teams and train people and get things up to speed, then assuming I do a good job, once I hit that 10, 12 mark, there's not as much for me to do anymore, right? The processes are in place, the products have been created, people are trained up, the salespeople are selling, the creators are creating, and there's not as much need for someone like me who is really good at that implementation, that initiation part. And so that was the moment where I thought, I think I'm really a consultant. I think that I thrive in this early part of the process where the points of change, maybe it's changing, it's a rebrand or a new team or something. But this idea that I can come in and sort of parachute in, help get people up to speed and get things running again. I think I would be better served, and so would my audience and my clients if I could function more like a SWAT team, if I were independent. And so
Ooh.
that's where I was able to, I get the idea in working with my husband, who's very entrepreneurial, to kind of structure what that could look like. And StoryFuel was born. And, over the last few years, we've evolved from where at first we were really serving publishers. So, other folks like, newspapers, magazines, websites, helping them set up brand content teams. We then transitioned to working directly with brands. So now most of our clients are the brands themselves. So we're skipping the middleman here and we're helping them get up to speed, set up their own brand content teams, optimize their processes, and really get their brainstorming in line. And I think what I found is when I was working with those brands in the early days, where I was helping them set up a brand newsroom, is they would say, well, how do you do that when we say we need content for such and such event or topic or launch? And I would just come up with a ton of ideas right there on the spot. And that's when I realized, like, oh, I didn't realize that everyone couldn't do this. This is something that comes natural to me, but it's sort of my duty if I'm taking on taking this torch of being a teacher to help people do this. I need to teach them this skill of coming up with the ideas as well. So I really had to dig into my brain and figure out what was happening inside there so that I could relay it to other people.
And you did, and you have dug in, and since you've had a daughter that you've named StoryFuel, and that's not true, but the brain piece kind of ties to brainstorming. And when I first heard about you, I was blown away by how detailed your expertise and how deep you go from the brainstorming side, especially when it comes to content production. So to start us off there, what does brainstorming just in general mean to you?
So to me, I think brainstorming is meant to be a process by which we come up with ideas. And I think that's intentionally vague because it's used brainstorming in so many different contexts and so many different ways. I think one of the challenges we have with our brainstorms is so often they have very little structure. If we think about what a brainstorm looks like, if we were to pick 10 different teams or 10 different people, we'd get 10 different descriptions of what a brainstorm is. It might be putting ideas on post-it notes. It might be using a whiteboard. It might just be hopping on a Zoom call and talking it out. There's really not a ton of guidance we know brainstorming is something we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to dig into our brain and come up with something, but there's not a ton of guidance on how to go about it. I mean, unless you want to get very scholarly about the studies that have been done about, the right kind of environment or the right color lights or the right scents that are, there's plenty of scientific background on the
Yeah,
conditions
I was
for
expecting to get my
creativity.
PhD in this interview.
Yeah. There's plenty of scientific stuff on sort of the ideal conditions for creativity. But in terms of what are we actually doing, what are we thinking about? What are we talking about? There's not as much guidance. And so my goal was to try to create a framework, the Content Fuel framework, which is the same name as my book, which, would really kind of walk people through. This is what you can think about in these sort of approximate order to come up with content ideas for whatever it is that you need content for, whether it's a product, a service, an event, or something else. So tried to make it as approachable and as sort of platform agnostic as possible so that it could guide all different types of brainstorming.
And the Content Fuel framework is actually how we connected in the first place. Shout out our mutual buddy Chris Strub Rubadub Strub, who was reading your book, and you had such a clear CTA at the end to introduce you to podcasters that he literally tweeted out and connected us that way. So
Yeah.
that's an example of the power of a clear CTA in itself. But on the brainstorming note, and when you think about your framework there, what's the clearest way that you have experienced to figure out what the hell type of content and marketing materials, et cetera, to put out there? Because it's so, as just on the marketing side, on the branding side, you never truly know what is going to be that dynamite piece of content at that time. But there's obviously ways that you can trend more in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the key challenges, right? There's so many options, especially now. Every time a new platform launches, it's like every social media and content marketer out there is rolling their eyes. Like we've got yet another format, yet another set of
Right.
steps we need to
Don't we
create
have enough?
for. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it just gets tougher all the time. So I think what you have to do is really come back to the core, which is what are we going to talk about? Like, what's the message here of this story of this piece of content? And then what's the best way to bring that to life? Because I think we get really hung up on, I need a TikTok idea, or I need a YouTube idea, I need a specific type of ad idea, and you kind of lose sight of what's important, which is what are you saying, what's the message, right? We're not trying to just create squares and rectangles for their own sake. Like what we really want to do is put out a message that matters. And so in order to do that, we need to focus on the message first. And so that's the recommendation, in the book and when I'm working with folks is always, instead of starting with the format, let's start with the focus. What are we going to talk about? What's the message of this content? What's the lens through which we're going to tell this story? Because once we know that, it becomes much easier to figure out the various ways we could bring it to life. So those decisions kind of get made for you by the story. The story almost tells you how it should be told.
And I think that's such a complete 180 from how so many people operate, is to, I think often people do look at it and say, hey, oh, I really need something for Instagram on X day or Instagram stories. And you're talking about starting on the complete other end. So how do you do that? How do you figure out what lens this kind of fragment of an idea should look like? How do you kind of get from point A to point A.1, if that makes any sense? A number one.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that's really helpful is, and probably this is the reason why we start with the format so often, is because we have a shared language, right? Like when I say to you a video, Max, you know what a video is. So we can
I
easily
do.
brainstorm
I've been studying
together.
up on what that word means. Yes.
Right? So like a video, an infographic, a podcast, right? We have a clear shared language for how we talk about those things. When it comes to what the content is about, it's much harder for us to encapsulate, sort of the perspective or the focus of that content with some sort of shared language. So it makes sense to me why we default to format first, because it's comfortable, it's easy to explain, and it's easy for us to collaborate with others on. So part of what we do is try to create a shared language around the focuses as well. What's the story about? So in the book I give 10 different ones just as a starting point. These are ones that I find work really well. But there are things like people. People is probably the best focus you can take. How do we tell this story through the perspective or the lens of a person? How do we focus on a person in this story? Data is another great one, really looking at a story through the numbers, examining the data and the numbers behind that particular topic. History is another good one, right? Looking back at how we got to where we are. So I think the idea is if we have sort of some tools in our toolbox to pull from to say, okay, we could do any of these, choosing from amongst those is certainly a lot easier than sitting in a room with a blank whiteboard and trying to say, of all the things that our brand does, of all the people associated with it, of everything that we embody as an entity, what should we talk about today on Instagram? That's a much harder place to be. Whereas if you pick a focus and say, hey, if we're gonna do, let's do a people focused piece on Instagram today. What do we think? Is there anybody we could put the spotlight on in our organization? Oh yeah, let's show our employee of the month. That's a great idea. Cool. All right. So how can we bring that to life visually? I guess we could just make a graphic that has their name on it. That's not super compelling, but let's see if we can get a photo of them, to put a frame on or something, right? So by starting with the focus and figuring out what kind of story am I going to tell, if you need to fill that box, you need to create something for Instagram, for YouTube, whatever else, you can ask the question, how do we bring that to life through video, through an image? But what you're doing is you're letting the story determine it first versus saying, hey, look, I took this photo of our product on the shelf, so I'm going to post that on Instagram today. Why? What's the story? What are we saying with that photo? Nothing, really. So it's just so much more compelling when you start the other way around.
Yeah, it makes sense to focus on the focus when you start off. Which of these 10 focuses, I mean, you mentioned people, data, history, etc. Which of these personally do you feel has the potential to be most impactful? Because it can obviously change depending on the brand or the story, but which of those is your personal favorite as far as impact goes?
I think one of the biggest ones, especially right now, as our entire idea of what's normal has been turned upside down. Process
Yep.
focused content is some of the most important stuff for sure, because I think we're all in a situation, you can easily identify something in your life that typically you would have outsourced or bought or hired out that you can't. And so you need to do it yourself or make it yourself or, adapt in some way. And so as a brand, if you can create process focused content that is tutorials, walkthrough, DIY instructions, recipes, anything where you're helping your audience complete something, that's a great way for you to not only showcase your expertise. So instead of saying we're the smartest, we know all of this, we're great, you're actually demonstrating it and showing your audience how much you can help them. But it's also a way for you to stay top of mind when your audience may not be able to engage with you. A great example of this would be many of us haven't had access to the beauty or wellness professionals that we're used to working with, whether that's your trainer, your gym, your stylist, whatever the case may be.
Oh, my stylist. Oh, it's been way too long.
I know you don't have to worry about getting your nails done, getting your hair done. You could probably
Hey,
just,
you
like,
never you
I don't
never know.
know,
I'm
buzz
always
it.
down to try out new things.
But the professionals who are going to provide instruction and help, if you were going to a gym and they've got two options, they can keep charging you, or you can withdraw your membership, or if they find a way to help you set up a home gym, then that's going to be a company that you continue to want to engage with because they've still provided you value in the interim. If they're offering online instruction or FaceTime, consultations or something like that, it's an opportunity for them to coach you through something that you would otherwise have to do yourself, which could not only be helpful, but sometimes create new business streams. I mean, one of the things that there's a lot of professionals, who typically would come into your home to fix something, a plumber, an electrician, I don't know, interior decorator, contractor, carpenter. There's probably opportunities where it's safe for certain types of jobs for those folks to continue to offer consultation via video call for things that you could do yourself. Now you're doing it yourself and you're having them help you through that process of doing it yourself because you absolutely have to, not because you want to become a carpenter or a plumber. So you're still going to need someone to fix that stuff a few months from now when it's safe again. So it's just process focused content is some of the most valuable, helpful, evergreen stuff you can create.
I don't know how I feel about valuable, helpful content. I don't know. It's a real bummer. Yeah, that's a really those are really great examples. And I'm just blown away by the 10 different focuses that you have and laid out and are included in your book. How did you come up with and decide on these 10 in the first place? This is like the brainstorming behind the brainstorming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it was a long process. So before I wrote the book, I didn't come up with this content for the book. This is sort of a framework that I've been teaching in workshops and consulting and in conference keynotes and things like that for several years before, the book came out. So it was sort of an evolution over time. It started, some of them had different names. Some of them were not represented in the original framework and added later as I found holes in it. I think, so much of what we do needs to be iterative. You have to try it and see what works. And so it was sort of a slow process of figuring out how do we not only try to encapsulate as many different perspectives as we can, as many different focuses, as many different formats, but how do we make sure that it's approachable? So I'll give you a really good example. The people focused content, it used to be called profiles because that's what we call it in journalism. You profile someone, right? You write
Oh,
a profile about them. But it became pretty clear to me that that worked really well if you were a journalist, that if you weren't, which is my entire audience, then that term doesn't really explain itself very well. And
yeah. I
so
was I
that's
was
where,
instantly thinking about social media profiles as soon as you said
there
it.
you go, right? That word has a lot of different meanings. And so what we do instead is we really try to make it as simple as possible. So instead of making it fancy and coming up with fancy terms, we just made it very literal, people focused content, history focused content, right? So instead of historical or profile, we just tried to make it as simple and approachable as possible. And so, a lot of that was really, the core concepts were the same, but we were adapting the names and the way we talk about it to make sure that it's going to be understood even if you don't have that background, because that's kind of the point.
If you take a step back here for a second, this is crazy because how you came up with this framework and how it eventually became your book is the same stuff that you preach every day with that.
Hmm.
Start with your focus and start with really the meat of it, and then eventually find your formats for it. And so in
Yep.
this case, a format is a book, but it's so cool how you've done that and changed it and made adjustments, tweaked along the way for years before even thinking about how this is a book. So that's really neat to see kind of the peek behind the curtains there. How about on the format side of things? So you mentioned video earlier. We talked about book, podcast. There's so many different formats out there.
Yeah.
How do you make the connection between focus and format when you're brainstorming these content ideas?
Yeah. So, like you said, in the book, there's also, we gave a little 10 focuses and 10 plus formats. There's some bonus ones in there, but
I like the plus.
yeah. The idea is, again, we do tend to have more of a shared language. So a lot of them are going to seem familiar. Things like writing, video, live video, audio, infographic, image gallery, right? These are really familiar for us as consumers. We consume content all the time, so we understand how this works. But there are some formats in the book and that I recommend that are a little bit different. So I think timelines is one of the greatest ways to tell stories that have any sort of chronological component, that something unfolds over time. Why not plot it over time and let people explore it in that way? We also talk about quizzes and maps, which I think, again, two really fun and engaging ways to tell stories, to bring a story to life that we don't think to use as often. So we're trying to not only help you categorize the things that are familiar, like, writing, audio, video, but explore some new stuff that maybe you hadn't thought of bringing content to life in that form before. And I think, one of the things that comes up is people will say, okay, well, you have these 10 formats, but what about a YouTube video? And I'm like, well, that falls into video. Or what about an Instagram post? Well, it depends. Is it a photo? Because then it falls into the images, or is it a video? So we really, really tried to break it down to its like simplest, most basic parts, like writing. Writing could be a caption for a photo on Instagram. Writing could be an entire book, an ebook, an article, a blog. It doesn't matter, right? We're just talking about what's the tool that we're going to use to bring this story to life. And so it allows for a lot of creativity, even though it might seem like 10 is limiting. The idea is just to give you 10 streets to drive down. There are still plenty of destinations along the way.
Right. And it's 10 plus streets on top of
Exactly.
that.
Right.
What are the key indicators of knowing, hey, this idea would be perfect for video or this idea would be perfect for an infographic?
I think each format kind of has its sweet spot, the things that are going to be best told in that way. And on some level, there's a little bit of magical instinct that I can't quite explain. But I think, generally speaking, you want to just think about is once you have a clear idea of the story, you'll be better able to tell if it's something that's well suited to those things. So I'll just give you an example. If we were talking about history focused content, and the suggestion was we make a timeline, something in your brain goes, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Because timelines are throughout time and we're talking about history. So I can't
Here you
explain
go with the word
exactly
time again.
why. Yeah, I don't know. I'm obsessed, I guess. I'm a time traveler. Something's
You're an
going on
affiliate
here.
marketer for the word time. Merriam-Webster's gives you quite the go on.
Yes, I get a per time referral rate here. But yeah, so it unfolds in a chronological way, and so plotting that on a timeline makes total sense. And I can't explain exactly why that is, right? It just suits it. It suits it well. If we're doing instructional content, we're doing process focused content, right? And we're saying, okay, how are we gonna teach this? Well, do we need visuals? Probably visuals would be helpful, right? You need to kind of see this process as we're explaining it. So that narrows us down. It probably needs to be photo or video or live video because that's what's going to give us the best way to deliver some visuals in this case. Okay, well, do we need to explain it with voice or could we do it in writing? No, we could do it in writing. Well, great. Then let's pair photos with the written text that gives each step. We don't need to go all the way to video. So I think once you have a really clear idea of the focus and the story you're trying to tell, you can understand its characteristics better. And so that allows you to figure out which format has the characteristics that you need.
It's such a smooth connection there. I like the examples that you shared. Since you have done this deep dive into the world of brainstorming and putting this content framework together, what has been the biggest thing that has maybe caught you off guard about brainstorming? Something that's really clicked about the process that you weren't expecting?
I think it almost goes back to the beginning for me. And part of the reason why I brought this to life in a book the way that I did is I was very blessed, I guess, in almost an ignorant way, like ignorance was bliss. I thought that everybody knew that this was a skill that you could work on and build and use. And I think one of the things that was so disheartening to me and really bummed me out when I first started doing a lot of the consulting and working with new brands was hearing people count themselves out, like hearing someone say, oh no, I'm not a creative, like I don't do that. And I was like, wait, okay, hold on. You could absolutely do this. What are you talking about? I think it really bummed me out that people felt like, brainstorming or coming up with ideas was this like exclusive elite club when I know that it's just a process. Like you just have to have steps to get it done. Like anything, if you have no process, then it's hard to be productive. But if you've got a process, it becomes very easy. And so I think that was a big light bulb moment for me because I realized here's this thing that I've taken for granted that I know to be, lucky me, it's an easy thing for me to do. I didn't realize that that was so valuable for other people. And that's why I felt like I need to figure out what is happening in my head so I could teach it to other people. I think like that was really the big driver for me is like, I don't want to work with clients who feel like they can't do this. That's not okay. Like I don't want them to feel that, I think we can all absolutely do this. And so it seemed to me like, I don't know, maybe it was an obsession, but it was just this feeling of like, okay, we've got to break this down and demystify it because these are really smart, talented people, and I can't have them sitting here thinking that they're not capable just because no one's ever showed them how to do this. Like that's not cool. I don't want to be a part of a system that perpetuates that myth that this is like an exclusive activity for only some people.
Max, with a quick aside here, you can develop awesome story ideas. You can brainstorm. You can create amazing content. You can have an awesome podcast. Do you want to spend all the time behind the scenes putting the podcast together? You might be passionate about the interviewing part. You might be passionate about sharing out your episodes and the networking and marketing benefits of having a podcast, but you might not be totally into spending hours and hours and hours editing every single episode. Well, I have your back. You can email me at max@hippodirect.com. I will take care of your production and I can help you out with planning and promotion as well. Email me at max@hippodirect.com. Let's bring your podcast to life. Let's make it as easy as possible for you and as fun as possible for you. Now, back to the mind of Melanie. Speaking of what's going on in your head, let's get to a segment on inspiration and creativity. So think about, obviously, creativity and inspiration, but people, hobbies, resources. To start us off, what do you do to stay creative and what do you feel like you're doing? Maybe an activity or a certain place you're staying, stuff we alluded to earlier. Something you're doing where you come up with your ideas.
maybe this is not exactly what you're going for, but some of the things that
I
really
need an
helped me,
exact answer, Melanie.
some of the things that really helped me is I know that it's important. If you want diverse output, you need diverse input. And one of the things that is really challenging, I think, for all of us on a creative level is we now live in a world where algorithms serve us up more of what we like and more of the same. And so you have to kind of consciously go outside of these algorithms to find new information. And I know that sounds really meta and really, really like philosophical, but what I mean is if you're listening to the same music and reading the same books and, seeing social posts by the same people and watching the same films, like you're going to have the same ideas. You're not getting any new ingredients to possibly mix up these recipes, right? So you're going to continue to get that. That's how these systems are optimized. I mean, one of the things I miss about the like pre-COVID world is I'm a big browser. I really like to go to like a bookstore or, an entertainment store and browse and find
Oh my
something
God.
that an
Again, when
algorithm
you
is.
said browser, and my first thought was Google Chrome.
I am, in fact, Google Chrome. No, but I really like that in-person experience because it's something that you can't approximate. Like coming across something that would never have been served up to you. You never, no previous purchase is going to lead you to say you would be interested in this book, but you saw it and the cover caught your eye and you pick it up and it's totally different. And so I try really hard to go outside of those algorithmic experiences to find new inputs. So sometimes, when we're all stuck at home, human recommendations are the best way to do that is just to ask someone, hey, what have you been listening to? What have you been watching? What have you been reading? Just mix it up, try different foods, I mean, so many of the ideas that we know as revolutionary are combinations of other ideas. And so you really just need to have a really diverse inventory. And the best way to do that is to break outside of your norm and listen to, watch, read, consume things that you wouldn't normally so that you've got, a diverse array of things to draw on.
You hear so often, what can you do to hack the algorithm? And I think you just revealed that the ultimate way to hack the algorithm is to just completely ignore the algorithm and put yourself in places and situations where there is no algorithm and it's totally up to you in terms of discovering new things and keeping your mind open. I really like
Yeah.
that philosophy there.
Or I guess if you're like trapped at home, I mean, swap algorithms with somebody, like ask for someone
Hmm.
else's Amazon recommendations or like did you ever log into someone else's Netflix account and you're like, this is a weird experience. Like this is not at all what I
Like, this is
see,
not Netflix.
Yeah, exactly. So, swap algorithms with somebody, check out somebody else's recommendations. It'll be a refresher for sure.
It is. How do you kind of check yourself to make sure that you aren't getting sucked into the algorithms that are out there on these social media platforms and so on? How do you make sure that you do kind of keep your mind open and pay attention to new things in order to mix it up a little bit?
That's a good question. I wish I had like a magic bullet, a secret secret sauce for when to know.
You're going to invent it. I feel it coming.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can kind of if you pay attention to it, I think you can feel it when you get stuck in a rut. And I don't know if you feel it in your gut, in your bones, in like a lack of excitement and passion for what it is that you're doing. Like, when you're not in your sweet spot, when you're not getting what you need to do your best work. And so for me, that's always the flag is like, am I starting to feel stagnated? Am I feeling uninspired? Am I feeling like I'm kind of distracting myself and procrastinating from doing the creative work because I don't have enough fuel to make that happen. And so whenever things start to feel off, that's always a signal to me like, all right, what am I putting into this machine and how can we put something new in because this is not working. So I don't know if I have something else other than kind of like listen to your body, trust your gut, and when you're not feeling it, something's off and it's time to recalibrate.
And that use of fuel, I'm seeing where story fuel and content fuel comes from. I mean, your name happens to be Diesel as well,
Right.
but something that I think typically makes people feel like they've lost their energy or enthusiasm is writer's block. And I think
Hmm.
historically, this is something that is associated with authors and people writing books or long articles, things like that. Of course, epic poems, how could I forget? And this is something that nowadays can apply to literally anything. It could be a short post on your favorite social media platform. What is your favorite way to tackle writer's block?
I mean, I feel like I'm a broken record a little bit, but really whenever I'm feeling
Go for it.
stuck, I just put myself in a different situation. And that might sound, I know it's hard because so many of us are stuck at home. You may have limited access to your normal resources, but like go for a walk, close your laptop, go read a book, like listen to a totally different music. I mean, when I feel stuck, it really, to me, it is like the conditions that I'm in right now are not ideal for this work. So how can I change those conditions? Whether it's, okay, maybe I just need a snack. Like maybe I'm just hangry, like let me just have a snack and go
That's
for a
like
little walk
24/7 for me.
or yeah, right. I mean, the snack almost always helps.
Yeah, there's no downside.
Yeah, just for me, it's really about just, okay, mix it up because sitting here and continuing to be frustrated and stare at this blank screen is not going to solve this problem. So what can we do? And for me, I find that a lot of times have a snack, go for a walk, tend to work well for me. That's obviously a little more challenging if you're stuck at home or if it's not safe for you to do so. But find a way to just do something different because I think too often we convince ourselves that writer's block, creator's block is something you have to power through. And that's not really the case. You can outsmart it. It's not something you just need to stare at your laptop. And if you stare long enough, eventually it'll come. Like, why suffer through that? Just mix it up. Try something else.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely miserable. I think you're spot on that even if we are trapped at home, there's ways to escape metaphorically. And so that
Yeah,
could be something as small as a snack, that could be a shower, it could be a new show or video. So many tourist companies now are putting together amazing videos of landscapes of
there you
of
go.
whatever country they're from. So there's so many ways to do that. Outside of that, what are your favorite hobbies? What do you like to do in your free time? Not necessarily to inspire ideas, but just
Yeah.
things that mix it up from when you're, historically on the clock.
I I'm not good at this question
Oh, great.
because
I actually love that
yeah,
answer.
yeah, this is one of those things I always struggle with, and I think in a lot of ways, I don't want to say I'm always on the clock because that sounds really bleak, but what I mean is my brain always works in that way. So I'm always kind of in problem solving mode, and it's hard for me to shut that off. And I think a lot of creators have that too. Like I imagine if you're a filmmaker, you can't really watch TV, or watch movies without seeing, production glitches and things like that. And so for
Oh, yeah.
me, when I see content, which is everywhere, which is everything, I have a hard time shutting it off because I see the strategy or I see the missed opportunities. And so it's hard for me to unplug and just like watch a movie for movie's sake or something. But I've moved recently, and so one thing I've been trying to do that kind of helps me clear my head is just go for a little drive in the new area and
Yeah.
listen to audiobooks. So it's a way for me to just kind of like focus my mind somewhat singularly on something and just take in new landscape and new ideas. So that's probably the closest thing to a hobby I have in these Corona times. But that being said, I also have a nearly 1-year-old child at home. So, your hobbies sort of go out the window in favor of their hobbies. So I don't think watching like, nursery rhymes on Netflix counts as an adult hobby, but that is a
It's not that
significant amount of our
that's
time.
I'm confused if that's your hobby or her hobby.
It is in fact her hobby. But I'm a bystander in this hobby.
It does. It sounds like a lot of fun. In terms of audiobooks, what is your favorite audiobook of all time? If you had to pick one.
Ooh, I recently listened to Malcolm Gladwell's Talking with Strangers.
Mm.
What I
His
really
stuff
liked,
is consistently like amazing.
so good. Being totally honest, I had read all of his previous books in their physical form, so maybe this is how all of his audiobooks are, but what I really loved is I felt like he innovated in the format. Instead of having quotes, he had the actual individuals he was quoting read their quotes. So you heard the
Really?
different voices. Yeah. So you heard like the interviews. There was also music. So there was a particular song that played, and he explained the song and why he chose it. And it played at the beginning and end of each chapter. So he really created an audio experience more than an audiobook. And I think it really made me see how that format could be stretched beyond what I had thought, that in our minds, an audiobook is someone just reading a book. And he found a way to really turn it into, I mean, it had a very like NPR podcast feel, like it really felt so heavily produced. There was so many different media, they were playing clips from old films. I mean, it was really spectacular from sort of a production standpoint.
I was gonna say it sounds like a blend of an audiobook and a podcast. Like that's kind of a
Yeah.
new, more focused category there. Let's get to a fan favorite segment called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. This is where we talk about an ad or campaign that caught your attention. And we started off this conversation talking about toilets. So, of course, we're going to talk about diapers now as well. Can you
Yeah.
explain what you recently experienced there?
Oh my goodness. So, one of the things you'll find for anyone listening, as soon as you are expecting a child, suddenly you are in all the funnels. You are in all the marketing funnels and you get all the messages for bottles and diapers and clothes and everything. So, one of these things I somehow got put into is text alerts from a diaper company. And I'm not going to name and shame them because I genuinely think this was a mistake. But I received a text message from them just yesterday announcing that they were having a major diaper blowout. Now, what they meant, I'm sure, was a sale because there was no puns, there was no jokes. Like it was straight up just a bad headline announcing their upcoming sale.
How does that word
However,
get approved?
right, anyone with a kid or who has done any sort of childcare knows that a blowout is something you most absolutely do not want with a diaper. That is when the diaper fails to do its job of containing what it's meant to contain. And so I got this text and I'm just like, a diaper blow. I mean, from a branding standpoint, I don't know why you want me to associate your brand with blowouts. Like that's pretty bad. But also just it made me realize, I mean, whoever's writing this copy and approving this copy must not understand, like they must not have kids or have done focus groups or really understand, because it was so obvious, to anyone who has been in those shoes. And so yeah, it was just one of those things where I thought, man, that is like a real gaffe, a real missed opportunity. Now, to their credit, I mean, I am talking about it, so I suppose maybe there was some provocative intention, but having read the rest of the copy, I really don't think so. I don't think it was meant to be clever. I think it was just a total miss.
If so, that's extremely clever. But the
Yeah.
word blowout has a few different meanings. At least it's got a few different meanings, a few different entendres. I will never
Yeah.
think of the word blowout the same again. So thank you for that. And thank you for
Sorry.
whoever included that. It's okay. We'll let it slide. Do you have like a quick fix for anybody who's about to press the big go button on a campaign to just kind of check through it and make sure that something's not going to resonate in the wrong light like that?
I mean, I know this is going to sound so simple, but you need to check it with, do a focus group. All your major things like that, your copy, your slogans. I mean, all that stuff. You should be doing some sort of focus group. But even if your version of a focus group, because of the resources you have, is like ask someone who's outside of your industry or a friend or a cousin or whoever else, right? Just show them the thing and see what they say, because sometimes it just takes someone who's not so embedded in the work to see a double entendre or a hidden meaning, or the way an image or a graphic looks that is not what you intended. Like it just takes a
Yeah.
fresh set of eyes sometimes. So that's honestly, I know it sounds just like before, right? Like remove yourself from the situation, just get a fresh pair of eyes on it. Sometimes that saves you more than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. That can be all it takes. It could be all you need. So let's get to a segment called The Unusual. So I promise not to talk, or at least not to intentionally bring up diapers or toilets or, anything in
Okay.
that category. I think we've ran that to the ground, to the toilet. What is your biggest pet peeve?
Ooh, my biggest pet peeve, I think in-person scenarios, I really dislike when people chew with their mouth open. I just find
Oh
that
yeah.
that
Yeah,
sound, which
that's
I'm
not
not even
fun.
gonna do it. I'm not even gonna do that to your poor listeners. Yeah. Oh, I can't do it.
If you jump off right now, it's okay. I don't blame you.
That no, that was for illustrative purposes, so we'll let it go.
Yeah. I'm gonna get paid royalties for that.
Nice.
All right. Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. It's not proper etiquette. How about quirks? What is something that maybe your husband or somebody, maybe your daughter hints at it. Maybe there's something that you do that's a bit quirky, but it's part of your personality.
I am a big fan of coffee, which if you follow me on social, it plays a big part in my life. But I
It's
am
responsible
also
for every single post.
possibly. However, I am also really good at making a cup of coffee and then promptly forgetting about it. And so, sometimes I'll go out into the kitchen or back into the office and I'm like, huh, this coffee's from this morning. Like, look at this bonus coffee, surprise. Like, it's a gift for myself later because I make a cup and then I leave it somewhere. So that I don't know if that's a great quirk, but it's certainly a habit that I'm trying to break.
I think it's certainly great for you when you totally forget about it and then discover something later. So I think you're just
Yeah,
proactive about gifting yourself ahead of time.
right.
And then how about weird talents? So in addition to that coffee talent, if you want to call it that, what is something that you're really good at, but doesn't really necessarily have an impact on your business? So maybe it's something around the house. Maybe it's like a human body trick. We've had recent guests talk about being double jointed. What comes to mind there?
I can play the didgeridoo,
Really?
which
I knew it.
yeah.
No.
The didgeridoo, for anyone
Wow.
who's not familiar, is like a giant, long tube-like instrument that's,
Yeah, isn't that the thing that's
Australian,
like wah, wah, wah,
Aboriginal.
wah, 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 wah,
Yep.
wah?
I
That was
mean,
it.
pretty much it exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. So I
So
guess that
that's
makes two
that's
of
like
us.
my hidden random talent.
How did you learn
There are
that?
You know what? When I was growing up, my grandfather was really involved in native arts, and so he did a lot of basket weaving and beading and things like that. And so he was taught by someone, and he taught me. There's not, yeah. I wish there was a more interesting origin story. It was just like one of those skills passed along.
That is a one of a kind talent to pass down from generations. So that's amazing. Well, in the future, I look forward to hearing or seeing this. Is there any video or anything of you out on social media playing this, or is it kind of like a behind the scenes talent?
It is kind of a behind the scenes talent, but you just made me think. I was like, we just moved. Where did my didgeridoos go? So
Oh
I'm
no,
gonna
don't
have
tell
to
me you lost the
find them.
didgeridoo.
No, no, they're not lost. I just don't know which room they ended up in, which closet they ended up in. So I'll have to track it down. Maybe we'll do a concert at some point.
Clearly, they're in the didgeridoo room. Well,
Right, right.
hopefully you find it soon. So let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, let's get wild. So you recently moved from Jersey City to Raleigh, North Carolina. You mentioned that you like going on drives. What has been a favorite place to drive or kind of a favorite discovery so far?
Oh, we found the Museum of Art, which has like a really
Oh,
cool outdoor sculpture garden area. That was pretty cool.
that does sound pretty cool. What is something your one-ish year old daughter has done that just made you absolutely crack up?
Uh, she's just a real silly kid. Like she really loves to laugh. But she really enjoys doing like spit bubbles with her mouth, like making that raspberry sound.
You're gonna set a record for sound effects too.
And sometimes when we ask her questions, she'll respond with that sound, not being rude because she's too little for that, but just it I don't know, sometimes that is like the most inappropriate and yet hilarious response.
That is. And who is your favorite cartoon character of all time?
Hmm. No one's ever asked me that. That's good. My favorite cartoon
I
character of
thank
all
you.
time. Let's go with Wile E. Coyote. He had a lot of creative
Nice.
solutions to unique problems.
Absolutely. Shout out the middle initial. Well, Melanie, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Really appreciate you taking us through everything from spit bubbles to toilet stories to, of course, your amazing content framework. Where's the best place for people to connect with you and to buy your book?
So you can learn all about me and my team and all that we do to help folks learn how to tell better stories at storyfuel.co. So that's story, fuel.co. There you'll find links for the book. So that'll tell you all the different places where you can buy it, including if you want signed copies. We also have a companion workbook. So if you want like fill in the blank guide to coming up with all these ideas, you can get that there as well. And on the website, you'll also find all my social links. So if you look for me, Melanie Deziel, Deziel, you'll find me across social, wherever you share your favorite things.
Bam, bam. And last thing here, final thoughts. The stage is yours. It could be a spit bubble or a didgeridoo solo, whatever you want. Send us off here.
I just hope that all of you realize, if you're listening, like you have stories to tell, and it is 100% within your power to find the unique ways to tell those stories. So the world's waiting. Go out there, tell some stories. Let me know if you need some help along the way.
How about that for a story? Thank you, Melanie, for sharing your stories, your wisdom, your use of the word time, and for coming on the podcast. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also check us out on Good Pods, where you can find all the podcasts your friends, family, and others are listening to. In addition, connect on social media at the handles Hippo Direct and Max Branstetter, and you can always learn more about what's going on at Hippo Direct at hippodirect.com. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!